In 2003, the area that the Dabaweños now call the People's Park was just drowned, muddied when it rained the night before. I walked early enough to see the luminescent moon and some of the brightest stars against a bluing expanse of sky. Crossing the street from the park on my way home, I saw wooden carved stars against a clear lapis lazuli sky. It was the transom line of a house that was being demolished. My grandparents' home in Davao City had similar motifs. I had seen old photographs that we lost to fire in the early 1970s. But what I saw that morning was not in the pictures. That experience brought back a memory of skylights, streaming through the patterns and casting fascinating shadows inside the house. That same month, I was in Camiguin. I saw the motifs again. I was surprised. I thought only my ancestral home had these. With visual artist Rosalie Zerudo and sculptor Kublai Milian, we toured the island on motorbikes and saw an amazing display of patterns. Davao architect Edmundo Villacrucis identified the geometric motifs as architectural venting details. He had done his thesis on ancestral homes in Quiapo. He observed that the use of such architectural details have disappeared. He wondered, what made them work? And why have we changed them? Was losing them for the better or worse? With two other architects, Omar Payumo, Eric Sonio Ropa, and Carl Gaspar, a doctorate in Philippine studies, we resolved to follow through the investigation before we lose these ancestral treasures to decay, neglect, and war. With the support of the National Commission for Culture and the Arts, we did the study in 2008-2009.
Five members of the team journeyed alternately to document what they originally called venting light screens. The study scope initially only included Mindanao. They broadened that to include Manila. Later, when they realized that the maestro carpintero, artisan, who built these houses came from Bohol and Cebu, they also did limited investigations there. In 2008, the peace talks between the government and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front broke down. Taking the opportunity at the end of Ramadan, and with a planned escape route just in case, the team proceeded to document structures in Lake Lanao, which is why the people are garbed in festive attire. By 2009, there were massive evacuations of the civilian population. The team documented what areas could still be reached in Maguindanao. The team traveled a total of 7,000 kilometers around Mindanao. Co-researchers tuned in the team to current events, facilitated entry to ancestral houses, helped to collect stories and local histories, and narrated events that took place in the sites they passed. The team cameras did not stop clicking. They also documented 19th century ancestral houses that preceded the houses that were being studied. What they found would open their eyes to a unique Filipino tradition of building a tropical house. They found each house is its own, no typicalness or uniformity of patterns, and therefore there was a need to document all. The towns and cities that were not devastated in the war had more extant samples of houses with a decorated transom line. The Davao Gulf is a very large bay, home to 15 distinct groups of Davao indigenous Lumad. In the mid-19th century, a Spanish settlement was established in the exact site that was the old town by World War II, but there are no remnant stone architecture documented in Davao City. A few were documented in the eastern coast. Very early into the American colonial period, by 1904, American soldiers turned pioneers brought in immigrant Japanese to work in the plantations. By the 1920s, some of these Davao plantations changed hands to new Japanese owners. The first wave of Japanese and Chinese catechumens married to Tagalogs were dispersed by the Spanish to work in agricultural communities in the 17th century. Among those, for example, who was sent to Laguna was the ancestor of Jose Rizal. The presence of a new wave of immigrants, and indeed of the old, influenced house-building technology in the melting pot community of Davao. World War II quickly turned plantations and backyards into battlegrounds. In September 1944, bombs incinerated practically all Davao City homes in the Poblacion as part of the U.S. military exercise to determine the strength of the Japanese forces. Among the houses that survived the conflagration were the Campo House and the Obosa House that is now a restaurant. It is a rare example of a 1.5-story wooden chalet, where 2-story wooden structures abounded. The overall patterning and economy of lines that is the mark of the Japanese artisan is fully demonstrated in this house, as also elsewhere in Mindanao. These motifs harken to Art Nouveau, popular in Europe in the second half of the 19th century, which, interestingly, were originally inspired by Japanese prints. These confluences come full circle in these houses in Mindanao. At the perimeter of the city Poblacion, there were more extant samples, and along the national highway going out of the city. The Davao Gulf areas were close to Davao City, and so the team sent back interviewers. The descendants expressed their wish to preserve their legacy. Some expressed concerns regarding the cost of repairing the motifs and whether there were skilled carpenters around to do this. The Furukawa Estate House, located within a huge complex of industrial buildings in Daliao, was built in 1943 by Japanese artisans. This house was built in 1936. Benito Kibod traveled back to Bohol to hire artisans and bring them to Davao. The house in Santa Cruz was built in 1927 by either Japanese or Chinese carpenters because at that time there were the skilled artisans in Santa Cruz, Davao del Sur. The Monday houses in Dapnan, Baganga were built by Hipolito Puling Molato of Bohol in 1949 to 1950. Puling Molato was the only pre-World War II artisan that the team met in the course of the journey. Puling came with Catalino Balu to the Davao area in the late 1930s. Mahirap ang Bohol, mahirap ang trabaho. Both of them trained in the workshop of Puling's older brother Cornelio, and in the midst of the World Economic Depression, produced the geometric motifs that the homeowners demanded. A long, narrow keyhole saw was inserted into a homespun tool after boring a hole in the wood. The motif was first drawn on one half of a cardboard, and both halves were cut out to produce a symmetrical design, later approved by the homeowner. They sourced the hardwood like yakal, lawaan, molave, nara from the forest close to where the houses were built. They used a 1-inch thicker cut for the balusters below the windows, and a thinner cut for the motifs along the transom line. The house along the National Highway in Bacolin, Baganga, with its back to the sea, was built by Catalino Balu after the war in 1950. The house in the center of Baganga was one of the first houses built by Balu back in 1938. One house had been converted into a traveler inn. Intersecting parallel bars motif. This evoked similar patterns seen in the Summer Palace in China. An eye juxtaposed with 12 rays is combined with a lattice motif. Abstracted plant patterns adorn the transom line, with patterns based on basic shapes. Hardly damaged by the war, the team found numerous heritage structures in Bohol. These can be dated by the wider wood boards used in the pre-1927 period. The later period houses used narrower wood boards. The Boholanos had a very early experience of colonialist attacks, and thousands evacuated to Mindanao. Through the centuries, they populated Dapitan, Misamis Occidental, Iligan, Misamis Oriental, Agusan del Norte, and Camiguin, and made an impact in the house-building technology. Emiliano Caballo was a later type settler. He came back to Bohol after his children were all grown. He went to find work in Mindanao hemp plantations before the war, married and moved to Misamis Occidental, where he built a replica of his ancestral home in Bohol. In Bohol, carving was a skill that was passed on from generation to generation. The carvers Juana Dolorican and Insyong Hongayo of Songkolan Dawis told the team, divide the span into two, find the center, then divide into two, find the center, and so on. Be sure that the holes in the middle fit each other when the panels are slid in and installed next to each other. Today, there are workshops of carvers in Bohol that mass-produce motifs and also produce new designs. It was observed that the Bohol motifs were found mostly on top of windows. Moreover, motifs were found in the interior wall of houses built at the turn of the 1920s. The team called the motifs in the interior drop walls interior venting light screens, or IVLS. Stories about Jose Rizal animated the team's visit to the ancestral houses. Two houses, in particular the Zapanta and the Lumasag houses, were built by former pupils of Jose Rizal at Talisay, Dapitan. The house, now the office of the Department of Tourism, has undergone major renovations and is distinguished for the American influence in the wraparound veranda. Most other houses were two-storied cantilevered structures. The team observed that the motifs tended to wrap the entire transom line exterior wall, unlike the Bohol sample. The Rodriguez house, with abstracted motifs, was the work of a Japanese artisan. Only one house structure in stone was documented, a bahay na bato at kahoy in Ozamis City, where there is also a fort, and in Jimenez, a stone church. Notably, the most number of variations in motifs surveyed, excepting perhaps for Bohol, were found in Camiguin. The residents told the team that whatever little damage from World War II was confined to Mambahaw. Many of these ancestral treasures, unfortunately, were rapidly deteriorating. The house of Vicente Elio, Camiguin historian, was located just a few street corners away from the Mambahaw church. It is decorated with simple motifs nearest the roof and in the interior drop walls, most certainly among the type of decoration that he describes as some 50 wood and nipa houses, some large and well decorated. Most houses had nipa or kogon thatch roof, tabik walls, and wood. Granaries already started using zinc roofs. Some homes had motifs only in the interior drop walls. Elio also wrote about the popularization of the Noli Me Tangere in 1893. Revolutionary battles waged in 1896 in Misamis Occidental, Cagayan de Oro, Misamis Oriental, Butuan, and the foothills of Lanao and Bukidnon, and the closely ensuing Philippine-American War with the participation of Filipino Lumad Baganis and the Bangsamoro. These wars explain the scant stone structures in northern Mindanao. Stone structures were the site of battles and the first to be burnt. There were numerous samples of houses with the decorated transom line in the towns of Misamis Oriental all the way to Cabadbaran, Agusan Norte, which is close to the archaeological sites of Butuan. Cotabato City, Maguindanao, is the gateway to central Mindanao. It was the seat of the powerful Maguindanao Sultanate that reached its peak in the 17th to 18th centuries in the reign of Kachil Kudarat, a descendant of the royal Malaccan dynasty that was sacked by the Portuguese and was so addressed as a king by the Spanish, the Dutch, and the English. But whatever ancestral structures that survived World War II were lost in the 1970s war. Cebuano artisans built these houses in Glan, Sarangani. A limited tour of Cebu and Bantayan showed houses with a decorated transom line, and as well, bahay na bato at kahoy with IVLS. The Pen and Dayang Petron woodworking and weaving shop in Bato, Davao del Sur, is a branch of the factory located in Parang, Cotabato. His knowledge about carvers showed that the tradition is alive in these areas. Pen said Cebuano carvers are experts in bulit carving figurative expressions, while the intricate stylized carving of the Maranao is okir. He identified the tool used to carve the motifs into wooden panels from photographs that the team showed to him. He said this is the perforating or pagbuslot type of carving called the pamso technique in the Iranun Maranao Maguindanao language. Manila was heavily damaged in World War II. By March 3, 1945, Intramuros and the newly built Ermita Malate were in ruins. 100,000 civilians died in the crossfire between the U.S. forces and the Japanese soldiers. The gutted-out portions is exactly the site of the kingdom and fruit orchards of the pre-colonial early Filipino sovereign Raja Soliman. It was the center of the Spanish and American colonial governments. This ancestral chalet is located at the edge of the Ermita Malate district along Burgos Street. There were two other houses on this street, but these have been demolished. One other house was documented a street away, indicating that there were other structures with the decorated transom line in the Ermita Malate area where luxury apartments were built, and chalet structures with porches fronted the bay. Few bombs hit the Binondo and Quiapo districts, and because of this, there were many extant heritage structures. The Quiapo sample consisted of motifs in the interior drop walls or IVLS. The house built in 1914 that is now the Bahay Nakpil Bautista Museum showed continuous repeated patterns along the transom line exterior wall, but these are still encased in glass. The 19th century Bahay na Bato at Kahoy transoms were called espejos de cristal or espejos de calado or espejos de capis in a study of Philippine ancestral houses. But these studies had not identified the vented and decorated transom line. The team noted that sash factory manufacturers produced these motifs demanded by homeowners. Mass production was evident in different-sized same motifs in Quiapo, and same-size motifs found in different places in Mindanao show mass production of motifs were ongoing. There are a number of houses in Iligan with a decorated transom line. The Lake Lanao area of a temperate tropical climate is located 2,300 feet above sea level. There are many extant samples locally called Malaawalay Longhouse with a rectangular spread, and also square-footed houses in Pagalongan, Marantao, and Bacolod. Interestingly, the motifs found elsewhere in Mindanao were found in both the traditional Malaawalay rectangular longhouse and the square-footed houses. We can surmise that these motifs resonated with the tradition-bound Filipino Bangsamoro Maranao. Tugaya, located on the shore of Lake Lanao, where carver Sam Acop lives and works, is a haven for artists and artisans of various trades. Sam carves geometric designs into wooden drums. He uses simple tools like the leaf template as a base design. Then variations are added to complement an intricate abstracted foliage. But the team was not able to document a century-old royal torogan with the world-famed Okir carved panolongs. The torogan in Marantao is not a century old. Century-old panolongs were reconstructed to the Dayawan torogan in 1993. In 2.5 centuries from 1644, the Spanish had not successfully intruded in the lake area. The early Filipino Bangsamoro Maranao communities achieved a high level of civilization marked by artistic achievements in architecture, poetry, and literature. These stories are situated in a pre-Islamic, pre-Christian past. Having participated in Philippine revolutionary events from 1896, the Bangsamoro knew the power of the U.S. arsenal. The Datus of the lake region prepared for a static defense around Lake Lanao. In all, 100 lopsided battles were fought in the first 32 months of Governor Leonard Wood's rule alone. The Filipino Bangsamoro Maranao were armed only with bladed weapons and sometimes outmoded Remington rifles. Were royal torogans around the lake at the turn of the 20th century? A photo of a taller and more ornate torogan showing the American flag in the front walls confirmed their existence and loss. From this palatial structure, we can establish Filipino, Southeast Asian, Austronesian lineage with its steep overhanging roof, elevated apartment, wood posts and stone piles, and a well-decorated exterior wall. We can now better imagine the well-decorated structures that were destroyed in the original Dapitan Kingdom on stilts in Bohol, as well as those in Cebu and Mactan. House structures can only match the artifacts found in the archaeological diggings in Butuan. Zulkifli bin Abbas of Kampung Sungay Bulu in Geja, Melaka, trained for 1.5 years in Ukiran carving. The carved through Ukiran motifs are found all over the traditional Malayan house, not just along the transom line that functions as an airwell or lubang angin. From all these, we can all better imagine the structures that existed in the broadly Tagalog-speaking areas of Laguna, Rizal, Bulacan, and Manila. Kachil Kudarat talked about the once glorious nations of the Visayans and the Tagalogs. The Katipunero Supremo Andres Bonifacio had not exaggerated when he wrote that before colonialism, ancestors lived prosperously, and that young and old and many women knew how to read and write. The journey the team had taken in 2008 to 2009 showed that the decorated transom line was widespread in Mindanao, Bohol, Cebu, and Manila, and are seen in many parts of the Philippines. In that long journey, the team found a long-standing carving tradition that was innovated with a homespun saw carving tool and techniques. The tropical houses vented the rooms, diffused harsh tropical light, cast fascinating shadows in the interior, and ornamented the otherwise unassuming two-story wooden structures. The team assessment was held on the very same day that Ondoy hit and devastated Manila, strongly bringing home the point that architecture is about the environment as setting for human activities. In that journey, the team said the descendants sat with them and admired the decorated transom line, as if seeing these for the first time. These pre-war ancestral houses are largely maintained by the descendants. Local governments expressed their interest in markers, posters, brochures. Team members now see them everywhere. Some homes are refurbished. Some are venues for new economic enterprises like shops, inns, restaurants. Contemporary structures continue to be built using the carving tradition, in wood and in stone. In fact, the structures are not really just pre-war. They are a living reality. The tradition in these living houses will only continue to thrive across economic classes and socio-ethnic origins. Despite seeing many expressions of this unique living Filipino tradition, the team realized that the house with the decorated transom line is unnamed and merely described as burda, sanepa, venting aids, antiques. The team named it the Balay Ukit. This comes from two words, balay meaning house, and ukit, an ancient Malayo Bahasa word with the same derivative meaning as okil, ukil, okir, which means to carve, and refers to the design as well as the act of carving itself. The team architectural committee concluded, the pre-war Balay Ukit teaches us that the challenge is to vent your house and diffuse the light so elegantly you define the style. Balay Ukit is the detail that defines the style. But after the destruction of the war, the word was build fast using reinforced concrete technology. Mass housing in the 50s used less openings and derived more profits. Designs were copied from highly publicized homes built for a cold climate that was now desired by residents and builders. People lost awareness that they live in the tropics and became overly concerned about maintenance and cleaning that came with too many openings. They cemented huge portions of the garden. In time, they relied on drapes and tinted glass and technological fixes like air conditioning. Businessmen interested in huge profits from the wood that was now not demanded by the homeowners exported whole logs from the 1960s, depleting Philippine forests to critical levels. The cost of detailing in the Balay Ukit actually paid for itself in savings in energy costs. Trees, foliage, vines are the natural cooling components and were integrated into the plan of the house. What made it work? From the view of science, the building enables the flow of air and natural ventilation and light. From the view of art, the design is not only good for the eyes as ornamentation, but the details themselves define the style of the period and the character of the house. In structure, the Balay Ukit is not much different from the bahay na bato at kahoy, but it is lighter and better vented, and when the motif is very refined, quite elegant.
With the lessons I learned from the Balay Ukit, I decided to do a simple renovation in my own house. I removed the glass in the transom, installed an aluminum screen, and a window to improve cross-ventilation. Noong ako ay maliit pa, ang sabi ng lola, kapag maalinsangan ng panahon, sumipol ka at darating ang hangin. Naglalaro kaming mga bata sa ilalim ng malalaking payong ng mga puno o di kaya'y sa tubig kung saan naglalaro ang aninag ng araw. Ang arkitekturang Pilipino ay hindi katang-isip lamang. Ito ay inukit ng karanasan. Our ancestors learned from nature. I discovered that Philippine architecture is not whimsical nor pretentious. It is underpinned by the sensory experience of living in the eternal summer. It is the joyous experience of being within spaces created by the structures that bring subtle emanations streaming through ornamentation.